The next thing ignored here is that, in the first place, Muhammad had no right to make an attempt to capture Mecca or seek access into the idol shrine of Kaaba, which led to the signing of the Hudaybiyah Treaty. And Pipes is totally oblivious to the fact that Muhammad had broken the terms of the treaty at the earliest opportunity and repeatedly amongst other breaches, by killing a number of the Quraysh and plundering their trade caravans. It also makes little sense that Muhammad would attack the Quraysh, instead of attacking Banu Bakr, who were directly involved in killing the men of Banu Huzayl. Muhammad, at best, could come to the assistance to Banu Huzayl's attack on Mecca, not for his own capture of the city under any logic or reason. Let us return to Muhammad's attack on Mecca. The Quraysh leader Abu Sufyan, one of the Prophet's father-in-laws, learning of Muslims' approach, quickly set out in the darkness of night to meet Muhammad for persuading him not to attack the city. On the way, Abu Sufyan met his brother Al-Abbas, who assured him protection and led him to Muhammad. Omar al-Khattab, later the second caliph, came upon them and seeing Abu Sufyan, he cried out, "Abu Sufyan, the enemy of God! Thanks be to God who has delivered you up without agreement or word." He then rushed for his sword, adding, "Let me take his head slay I." Al-Abbas persuaded Omar against taking drastic actions on the ground of his promise to protect Abu Sufyan and brought him to Muhammad. Muhammad asked Al-Abbas to bring him back the next morning. When Abu Sufyan was brought back the next morning, the Prophet said, "Isn't it time that you should recognize there is no God but Allah?" Abu Sufyan never believed that Muhammad was a prophet, and when he hesitated, an angry Muhammad exclaimed, "Woe to you, Abu Sufyan! Isn't it time that you recognized that I am the apostle of God?" To this, Abu Sufyan answered, "As to that I still have some doubt." Seeing Abu Sufyan's life in immediate danger, Al-Abbas quickly intervened, forcefully telling him, "Submit and testify that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the apostle of God before you lose your head." Abu Sufyan had no option but to comply. Al-Abbas then requested Muhammad to do something for Abu Sufyan's people. To this, Muhammad said, "He who enters Abu Sufyan's house is safe, and he who locks his door is safe, and he who enters the mosque, Kaaba, is safe." Slay. On returning to Mecca, Abu Sufyan explained to his people about the futility of opposing Muhammad's advance into their city and asked them not to fight a losing battle. Instead, he famously said, "Aslam taslam," which means become Muslims if you want to be safe. He advised those who sought to persist in their pagan religion to stay indoors or take refuge in his own house. The next morning, Muhammad's Slay ibn Ishaq, p. 547 Slay Ibid, p. 547-48. Army marched into Mecca. One recalcitrant group of Meccans, who had fallen on the way of Khalid ibn Walid's army, showed a meek resistance. Khalid slaughtered those who fell within his reach, and pursued others who ran to save their lives up the hill. Upon capturing Mecca, Muhammad ordered the destruction of all idols of the Kaaba, shouting out, "Truth has, now, arrived, and falsehood perished, for falsehood is, by its nature, bound to perish." Slicks which Allah later copied as a revealed verse and included in the Quran. Quran 17:81. Muhammad stood in the middle of the Kaaba, and as he pointed to the idols, passionately worshipped by the devout Meccans for centuries, with a stick one by one, they were smashed into pieces. Muhammad himself destroyed a wooden dove, a deity of the Quraysh. After the capture of Mecca and pillage of the Kaaba, Muhammad sent Khalid bin Walid to destroy the idol temple of Al-Uzza at Nakhla, 2 days' journey from Mecca. A disciple, named Amr, broke the idol image, called Suwa, adored by the Hudayl tribe, the temple of the famous goddess, Al-Manat, worshipped at Qudiyad, was destroyed by a band of Medina Muslims, former devotees to the goddess. Many of the pagans accepted Islam on the day Muhammad captured Mecca. Before proceeding further, let us examine a few popular claims about Muhammad's exemplary dealing with the Quraysh on the occasion of capturing Mecca. Muhammad's exemplary forgiveness of Meccans. Muslims typically make a number of claims regarding Prophet Muhammad's conquest of Mecca. 1. Firstly, the Muslim army entered the city peacefully and unopposed, welcomed by the Quraysh. 2. Secondly, the Quraysh willingly converted to Islam in large number under no duress. 3. Thirdly, Muhammad showed exemplary forgiveness to the Quraysh by not putting them to death. Muhammad's peaceful entry into Mecca. Despite Muhammad's attacking Mecca by throwing away the 10-year-long Hudaybiyah treaty after just 2 years, the conquest was still a peaceful act to Muslims. Of course, Muhammad and his disciples had persistently violated the treaty even during those 2 years. As to the claim of Muhammad's unopposed entry into Mecca, it should not be difficult to realize what would have happened on that day had the Meccans tried to defend their city. What was Muhammad's demand to Abu Sufyan before attacking the city? It was, accept Islam or your heads will roll, wasn't it? And when some wayward Slicksibid, p. 552. El-Ibid, p. 565. Lemur, p. 412. Meccan citizens in their stupidity tried to oppose Khalid ibn Walid's army, they became food for the sword of his army. Muslims were allowed unopposed entry, not because they were a peaceful and lovable people, but because they were deadly and strong enough to overrun the weaker Meccans. The fate of the unfortunate Jewish clans of Medina, especially the horror sweared by the men of Banu Qurayza, who were put to the sword in barbaric manners by Muhammad, described below, was very much alive in Meccans' minds. Meccans' willing acceptance of Islam. If the Quraysh had accepted Islam in large numbers on the day of Muhammad's capture of Mecca under no duress, but because of Islam's peaceful message, a question naturally arises, why they did not embrace Islam 2 years earlier when Muhammad had led an expedition to Mecca. Why did they seek to prevent Muhammad's entry into Mecca with the last drop of their blood, which led to the signing of the Hudaybiyah Treaty? Moreover, during those 2 intervening years following the conclusion of the treaty, Muhammad did not do any peaceful and loving things, which might have impressed the Quraysh to embrace Islam in large numbers on the day of his capture of Mecca. Instead, Muhammad breached the treaty at the earliest opportunity and his disciples caused terrible sufferings to the Quraysh by persistently attacking their caravans and killing the attendants. He also threw away the treaty altogether 8 years before its expiry. Muhammad had also ordered a number of unprovoked violent raids against other non-Muslim tribes, namely the Jewish stronghold of Khaybar, Banu Sulaim, Banu Layth, Banu Murrah, Dat Atla, Muta, and Banu Naoy amongst others during those 2 intervening years. Finally, Abu Sufyan's message to his fellow citizen was Islam Taslam, become Muslim if you want to be safe. For their safety, there were only 2 options before them: first, convert to Islam, and second, take refuge in the mosque, Kaaba, or Abu Sufyan's house. These instances make it clear that it was not the peaceful nature of Islam or Muhammad's peaceful and loving gestures and acts that had convinced the Quraysh to embrace Islam in large numbers on that day. Muhammad's forgiveness. Prophet Muhammad sparing the lives of the surrendered Quraysh is portrayed by Muslims as a demonstration of outstanding generosity and forgiveness on his part. Muslims typically cite this as a proof of Muhammad's exemplary kindness toward his enemies. Muslims give an impression that, never in history, a leader showed such out-of-the-world forgiveness and tolerance to his vanquished enemies. But how could Muhammad, or any other nominally sensible person, slaughter a people, who had already agreed not to resist his capture of their city, and their leader, Abu Sufyan, had already accepted Muhammad's religion and prophethood? Muhammad had also promised to Abu Sufyan not to harm them, if they did not oppose his advance. It has been clearly demonstrated that the Quraysh never showed any cruelty toward Muhammad when he initially preached his religion in Mecca. They remained within civilized limits in their dealing with him despite his insult of their religion and customs for 13 years. It was Muhammad, who, nonetheless, had aggressively launched many plundering raids on Meccan caravans that led to a number of bloodletting battles between them. Muhammad's persistent raiding and plundering. Ibid, p. 392-93. Of Meccan caravans and disruption of their trades had caused immense economic loss and hardship to the Quraysh. More importantly, the Quraysh were the fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, and kinfolk of those Muslims, including Muhammad, who had emigrated from Mecca. Would the cruelest of human being in the world think of putting such close kinfolk, who had already undeservedly suffered so much, to the sword? In the thought of Muslims even of our time, Muhammad had not yet committed enough brutality against the Quraysh. To all Muslims, the evidently civilized and tolerant behavior of the Quraysh toward Muhammad was such an unpardonable crime that he should have slaughtered all of them upon his capture of Mecca. Muhammad's capture of Mecca, nonetheless, was not bloodless either. Khalid ibn Walid had brutally slaughtered those who sought to put up a meek resistance. Muhammad had also ordered execution of 10 or 12 Meccan citizens who had earlier abandoned Islam, or had criticized or ridiculed him and his creed. Some of the proscribed persons belonging to influential families, lobbied by their family members, were spared. Eventually, 4 persons were executed. Amongst them were 2 singing girls, who had composed songs ridiculing Muhammad. Given the kind of rather humane treatment Muhammad had received from the Meccans against the sort of torment, insults, troubles, bloodshed, and hardships he had caused them, no Meccan citizens deserved capital punishment in any sort of sensible justice, especially when they had unconditionally surrendered their homeland to Muhammad's rule. Further cruelty of barbaric nature was yet to follow upon Muhammad's conquest of Mecca. After destroying the Kaaba, Muhammad sent Khalid ibn Walid to bring the neighboring tribes into submission. Khalid reached the Jadhima tribe and ordered them to lay down their arms. Ibn Ishaq records, as soon as they had laid down their arms, Khalid ordered their hands to be tied behind their backs and put them to the sword, killing a number of them. The tribe had already offered submission to Muhammad. On this ground, a few Medina citizens and refugees in Khalid's party intervened, saving the lives of the rest. Moreover, the Jazima tribesmen had never caused any trouble to Muhammad or his community. This cruelty on them, therefore, was nothing less than barbaric. Upon Muhammad's conquest of Mecca, the way he mercilessly destroyed the idol gods of the Quraysh, put his critics to death, Khalid slaughtered those Meccan citizens who had shown a meek resistance, and the heartless way Khalid slaughtered the Jazima tribesmen, and so on, it represents an occasion of cruel atrocity on his part, not of forgiveness, kindness, and generosity of any kind. The Prophet had conquered or brought into submission all other pagan tribes of Arabia using violent or intimidating tactics, which will not be included in this book to keep the discussion short. However, his confrontation with the Quraysh, which was rather sympathetic, gives a prototypic outline of his dealing with the idolatrous people, which will apply to all idolaters of the world at all time. Li'in Ibid, p. 410-11, Walker, p. 319. Liv ibn Ishaq, p. 561. Muhammad's dealing with the Jews. Jewish Indians on Muhammad's mission. It has already been explained that Prophet Muhammad was highly influenced by the monotheistic beliefs of the Jews and Christians. This had, likely, inspired him to launch on his prophetic mission for preaching a monotheistic creed amongst the polytheists of Mecca, for proclaiming the oneness of God. Muhammad obtained the RST idea of the Jewish people and their creed and customs when he was on a business trip to Syria with his uncle Abu Talib at the young age of 12. Lv in Mecca too, he was friendly with one learned Jewish rabbi, named Abdus ben Salam, who is said to have had recited the Jewish scriptures and explained Jewish traditions to Muhammad. Ibn Ishaq's biography of Muhammad reveals that he used to visit the Beth HaMidrash, a house for the study of biblical commentaries in Mecca. Muslim commentator al-Baidawi relates that certain Jews used to repeat ancient history, as recounted in the Torah, to Muhammad. Muhammad is even reported to have had attended synagogues. This rabbi, who, allegedly, became a Muslim later on and took the name Abdullah ibn Salam, is believed to be the witness mentioned in Quran 46:10, which arms an agreement between the Quran and the Jewish scriptures. This verse was intended for exhorting the Jews to accept Muhammad's new religion. Lvi. When Muhammad relocated to Medina in 622, a number of Jewish and polytheistic tribes lived there. The Jews were a thriving, rich and influential community as compared to the less well-off polytheists. In affirmation of this, renowned Islamic scholar Abul Ala Maududi, d. 1979, writes, economically they, Jews, were much stronger than the Arabs. Since they had emigrated from more civilized and culturally advanced countries of Palestine and Syria, they knew many such arts as were unknown to the Arabs. They also enjoyed trade relations with the outside world. The Jews might have let Muhammad settle in their city without raising any opposition for two reasons. First, Muhammad was preaching a monotheistic creed among the hopeless polytheists to extirpate idolatry, which the Jews desired as much. Second, Muhammad's religion at this point was friendly and well disposed toward the Jewish faith, giving the Jews and their scriptures a very respectable rendering in the Quran. At the beginning in Medina, Muhammad continued pouring praise upon the Jews and their faith. He maintained good relations with them and adopted many Jewish customs, namely fasting, circumcision, turning toward Jerusalem while praying and so on, see below. Lvibn Ishaq, p. 7981, Muir, p. 21 Lvi Walker, p. 18081. Lai Maududi, 1993, Historical Background to Surah Al-Hashr, in Towards Understanding the Quran, TRS Ansari Zi, Markaz-e Maktaba Islamic Publishers, New Delhi.